Number one, I was never a libertarian. I never promoted libertarianism, except for the fact that I did work in the Rand Paul campaign because I thought that he would be better than the other options. And it was also local politics related to me in terms of Kentucky, and when I was doing undergrad and graduate work. So to me, the Rand Paul campaign was relevant. Ron Paul campaign, I hoped for stopping of the war and all this kind of stuff, but then when we saw that Ron Paul was obviously not going to win anything, and there was stealing, they were stealing shit from him in the primaries, I kind of just gave up on politics, pretty much because I believe that the entire American system was a joke, more or less. And it kind of is, but you see that's the brilliance, I think, of Trump, is that he's the postmodern president. And that's not to say that that means that the American, quote, system is legitimate. It's not. It's an engine that is real, though. It does exist, for good or for ill. And unfortunately, it has for a long time been turned to ill purposes. And so the question then is, well, could there really be somebody who's a troll and who's going to try to reverse some of this? And I think for the cynics, for the people who've spent a lot of time, in what we might call anarcho-libertarian type circles, there's just the de facto acceptance of no such possibility. A very cynical worldview. Everything is controlled. Nobody really opposes, quote, evil. Why is this? Well, because the attitude is that power in itself is somehow evil, or it's essentially never challenged or never changes hands. Nobody ever changes things, basically. It's just the status quo of the eternal battle between the libertarian individual, the atomistic individual, and the collective superstate or something. Whatever the mythology or narrative is supposed to be. And that's why I'm not a libertarian. I never have been. You will never find... You might find articles where for a while I was, a long time ago, maybe I misunderstood the Cold War because I'd not really delved into Quigley beyond, people talking about Quigley and what Quigley supposedly said. So, the last few years I really actually dove into Quigley and read the entire thing and got a better picture of the Cold War. But even Quigley, right, is not going to tell you that the entire Cold War is all fake. It's more so a managed dialectic, but the differences are real. And so in the same way, when we talk about dialectics, and this is going to come up in Orthodoxy and religion in the future, so it's not completely irrelevant to the subject at hand. When we talk about dialectics, those in the truth community, the independent media, the Ron Paul Tea Party types, the anti-war left, the what else? Anybody that we want to classify out there in media land that's not, CNN or Fox or whatever. The attitude generally is, when you come into understanding 9/11 or whatever it is, right? You quote, wake up. The attitude is very, still, I believe, left-centered. And when I say that, what do I mean? Well, I mean the leftism of classical liberalism. And if you recall, in the Carol Quigley talks that I did, we discussed Quigley's admission that classical liberalism was Banker Plan 2.0. Okay? Now, what that means is that Adam Smith, John Locke, Rousseau, Hobbes to an extent, Reed, Jefferson, Franklin, blah, 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 blah. All of these characters have been so formative for the modern world that we don't even know how to think outside these categories. We don't even know how to question the most basic fundamentals of liberalism. And that's because of the success of the British empiricist, pragmatist Enlightenment, and that whole project. So when I talk about Immanuel Kant writing essays about global government, or when I talk about the French Revolution and bankers and Masons being behind that and an ultimate push for a world government state, or when I talk about Jacobins and Girondins, and they're both the origins of the modern false left-right dialectic, right? When I talk about von Hayek talking about world government and global government as a good thing, I am not saying that therefore means that all distinctions or oppositions are a controlled dialectic. And this is a very important thing, right? So, for example, good and evil. Oh, that's just a controlled dialectic, man. We just live inside a Gnostic matrix, and once we see outside the matrix, we realize there's no good or evil. It's just no.
Wrong.
You see, the era of this kind of thinking, which I guess could ultimately maybe lead to some kind of Far Eastern Buddhist sort of nihilist, annihilationist type of perspective that the ego has to be completely wiped out. That is not true. That is not the view that I take. Okay, my view is that the whole modern world in the West especially is, for the most part, exceptionally conditioned by the events of the Enlightenment, the French Revolution, and the Reformation. Okay, these big movements, scientific revolution, etc. And what that means is that the dominance of that philosophy and its progeny, like Darwinism, Marxism, Freudianism, this has so permeated things, and monopoly capitalism, that people have a very difficult time questioning it, questioning these presuppositions, or thinking outside of it, because it's the milieu in which they've been raised. It's the water that they drink, it's the air they breathe. And it's just never even thought to be something you question. I did question these things. How did I get there? Well, I read the Bible a lot when I was in my teens and then in my 20s and even still. And I never really questioned that the basic teaching of the Bible was true and accurate from my perspective. I might have had different views of who God is or was, and maybe, refined those points over the years. But to me, I never accepted atheism and I never accepted agnosticism because they just didn't make any rational, reasonable sense to me. And I had a conversion process out of kind of a new agey sort of liberal idea, roughly not believing anything, maybe when I was 18. And ever since then, it's just kind of been a roller coaster journey of learning and experiencing new things in relationship to theology. Now, I understand that not everybody took that trek, and most people are not going to, probably. That's okay, I understand. I'm not trying to convince you that I have experienced everything perfectly and that I know everything or that I'm right about everything. But I do believe that my perspective has a philosophical basis, a logical basis, that it can be demonstrated, and that you can do apologetics. And so Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future is a very great bridge into that kind of a discussion, particularly for Jay's analysis, because it is both an apologetic and it's a rough defense of Orthodoxy, and it deals with the New World Order and one of its controlled major movements, the big time New Age movement.